The woman did not step aside. She placed her palm flat against his chest, fingers spread, rings catching the afternoon light, and she held it there. Not a push, something more deliberate than a push, a boundary drawn with a hand instead of a rope. Her other hand was already moving toward the phone in her cardigan pocket, and her voice was raised just enough for the family at the lemonade stand to catch every word. "You are not on the list," she said. "You did not pay the assessment, and I am not going to stand here and let someone who has not contributed a single dollar to this neighborhood walk in like he belongs at this table." The table behind her held paper plates, watermelon slices, and a clipboard. It was a folding table from a big box store, but she stood in front of it the way a person stands in front of something that cost them years. The man did not move. He did not raise his hands. He did not reach for the receipt in his back pocket. The one confirming the assessment had been paid with his rent 6 weeks ago, paid before she had decided to make him into a problem. He stood still with the particular patience of a man who has learned that doors held shut by other people's certainty tend to open fastest when you stop trying to force them. A woman appeared at his side. She was holding his daughter's hand, carrying a canvas bag of picture books, and the girl had a popsicle of uncertain origin already melting down her wrist. The woman with the books looked at the woman blocking the table. She looked at him. She did not let go of the child's hand. The woman with the clipboard turned to her. "And who are you?" she said. Curtis Vance looked at the woman beside him. She was not his wife. She was a children's librarian named Tess Nakamura, who had been part of his Saturday mornings for the past 14 months. And she was holding his daughter's hand with the ease of someone who had held it many times before. He looked at the woman with the clipboard. "She's my wife," he said. He said it the way a man says something he has rehearsed without knowing he was rehearsing it, lightly, almost smiling, the way a person tests a word that has been sitting in his chest so long it has worn smooth at the edges. Tess Nakamura went still. The color started at her collarbones and rose through her neck and into her face, with the slow certainty of something that could not be called back. She looked at the pavement. She pressed her lips together. She kept B's hand inside her own. And then, quietly, so quietly, it barely cleared the space between them, she said something that was not meant for anyone but herself. "I wish that were true." Curtis heard it. He looked at her. She was still looking at the ground, the color still rising, her fingers still folded around his daughter's hand. He did not say anything. He did not need to. He turned back to the woman with the clipboard and let the silence do what silence does when one person is loud and the other is not. Then a dark green sedan with State of Florida plates came around the corner onto Ridgewood Drive and pulled to the curb. A man in a charcoal blazer stepped out and walked directly toward Curtis Vance without looking at the block party, the lemonade stand, or the woman whose hand was still raised in the space between them. Curtis Vance was a structural engineer, 13 years. What that meant in practice was that he spent his working life looking at the bones of buildings and understanding what was sound and what was failing and what was being held together by nothing more than luck and the fact that no one had looked closely enough to see the truth. He had a doctorate from Florida A&M. His dissertation was on progressive collapse resistance in low-rise reinforced concrete structures, which is the kind of sentence that clears a room at a dinner party, and Curtis had never once tried to make it sound like something it was not. The work was not exciting, it was necessary. That had always been enough. He worked for a firm called Auden and Associates on Bay Meadows Road in Jacksonville. He was the only black engineer at the firm. He had been since 2015, and he would be until he left, or until someone new was hired, whichever came first. He did not talk about this. He showed up at 7 in the morning, and he read blueprints, and he drove to job sites in his 2014 Toyota Camry with the dent in the rear quarter panel and the car seat still installed in the back, even though his daughter was 6 now and technically tall enough for a booster. The car seat had been Lydia's choice. Curtis had not changed it. Lydia Vance died on a Tuesday in November of 2021. She was 33 years old. She was driving home from a parent conference at Westside Middle School, where she taught 6th grade orchestra, and a delivery truck ran a red light on Clement Avenue and struck the driver's side at 41 miles per hour. That number was in the police report. Curtis read it once in the kitchen at 2 in the morning, while their daughter slept. He put the report in a manila folder. He wrote Lydia on the tab in black marker. He filed it. He has not opened it since. What remains of Lydia is not kept in one place. It is distributed through the apartment in a pattern only Curtis understands. Her yellow cardigan hangs on the hook by the front door. Her reading glasses sit on the bathroom shelf beside the toothbrush holder, and next to the glasses, a Timex wristwatch with a scratched crystal face and a leather band gone dark with age. The watch does not keep the correct time. It loses 4 minutes every day. Every morning before coffee and before lunches are packed, Curtis picks up that watch and winds it. 16 turns of the crown. He sets it back on the shelf. He does not adjust the time. The apartment wakes in stages. 5:20, Curtis is up. 5:22, the watch is wound. 5:25, the The kitchen window is opened 3 inches, because Lydia always opened the kitchen window in the morning. She said the house needed to breathe. She said it in the first apartment on Kernan Boulevard, and she said it in this one, and she would have said it tomorrow if she were here. And so Curtis opens the window every morning and does not explain it to anyone, including himself. He makes coffee in a pour-over because the drip machine broke in January, and the pour-over was $9 at the thrift store, and it works. And that is all he requires from a coffee maker. He packs B's lunch. It is always the same. Peanut butter on oat bread with the crusts cut off because B considers crusts a personal insult. 8 apple slices, a cheese stick, and a note. Every morning he draws something new on a yellow sticky and tucks it inside the lunch bag where B will find it at noon. Monday's drawing was a frog playing a trumpet. Tuesday's was a cloud wearing sneakers. He is not a talented artist. B has told him so, with the gentle clarity of a child who does not yet understand that gentle clarity is not always gentle. She keeps every note anyway. They are rolled up in a mason jar on her dresser, and she thinks he does not know. B is 6. Her full name is Beatrice Lydia Vance. She has her mother's eyes and her mother's habit of tapping her bottom lip with one finger when she is thinking about something she has not yet decided whether to say aloud. She does it in the car. She does it at dinner. She did it the first time she met Tess Nakamura at the Ridgewood Branch Library, tapping her lip and studying the woman behind the children's desk the way a building inspector studies a foundation. She decided she approved. That was 14 months ago. Curtis had taken B to the library because it was Saturday, and because Saturdays had become the hardest day of the week. The weekdays had structure: school, work, dinner, bath, story, sleep. But Saturday was the day that had belonged to Lydia. The farmer's market on Riverside, the park on San Marco, the watercolor afternoons on the living room floor with newspaper spread out to protect the carpet. Saturday was the shape of a family with all its members present, and when one member was gone, the shape did not hold. The day caved in like a room missing a wall. The library fixed this, not because it was extraordinary, but because it was ordinary in the right way. It had beanbag chairs, a caterpillar rug, and a weekly story hour run by a woman who read aloud with the kind of commitment that made adults stop and listen from the biography aisle. That woman was Tess. She was 31. She kept her dark hair in a braid that she pulled over one shoulder when she read, and she dog-eared pages instead of using bookmarks, which B noticed on the 3rd week and addressed with the prosecutorial confidence of a child who has learned the rules and intends to enforce them. "You are a librarian," B said. "You are not supposed to do that." Tess looked at the bent corner. She looked at B. "You are absolutely right," she said. "It is my worst habit." B tapped her lip. "My daddy draws bad," she said. "That is his worst habit." Tess looked up at Curtis, who was standing 3 feet away, pretending to read the back of a novel he had no intention of checking out. She covered her mouth with the book. He could see her eyes above the spine, the kind of eyes that hold a laugh inside them even when the mouth is hidden. That was the beginning. No one named it. It happened the way weather happens, so gradually that by the time you notice the sky has changed, the change is already old. Curtis brought B every Saturday. Tess saved books for her in a small stack behind the desk, with BEA on a sticky note, the color of the note changing each week, which B noticed, and began requesting specific colors for, which Tess provided without complaint. Curtis stood nearby. He asked about the books. She asked about B's week. They talked in the careful way that two people talk when the space between them is getting smaller, and neither has decided what to do about it. Curtis did not talk about Lydia. Tess did not ask. This was not avoidance. It was the kind of respect that only someone who understands grief can offer, the understanding that the door opens when the person inside is ready, and that knocking does not help. What Curtis carried underneath those library Saturdays was a second life no one at the Ridgewood branch knew anything about. 14 months earlier, the same week he first brought B to the library, Curtis received a call from a man named Martin Yu. Martin was a senior investigator with the Florida Division of Housing Safety. He had found Curtis's name in a database of licensed structural engineers who had filed voluntary hazard reports with the state in the past 5 years. Curtis had filed 3. 2 were commercial properties with load-bearing wall modifications that had never been permitted. The third was an apartment building on the south side of Jacksonville, where Curtis had noticed vertical cracking in the stairwell columns during a casual visit to a friend. Martin Yu was interested in the apartment building because that building, a 48-unit complex called Ridgewood Commons, was one of 4 residential structures built between 2017 and 2020 by a developer named Leland Ross Properties. And Martin Yu had been investigating Leland Ross for 11 months. The investigation was called Project Cornerstone. Leland Ross had built 4 affordable housing complexes in the Jacksonville metro area using a concrete supplier that had been falsifying compressive strength certifications since 2016. The concrete poured into the foundations, columns, and bearing walls of those buildings did not meet the minimum standards required by the Florida Building Code. It was not close. In 3 of the 4 buildings, buildings. Load tests Martin's team had conducted covertly showed compressive strength values 30% below the required threshold. The rebar spacing was inconsistent. The inspection reports showed compliant curing times, but those reports had been signed by an engineer paid $4,000 per building to sign whatever Leland Ross put in front of him. 212 families lived in those buildings. Martin needed a structural engineer who could assess the buildings without alerting the developer or the compromised inspector. He needed someone local, someone who could move through the neighborhood without drawing notice, someone patient enough to do careful work over a long stretch of time. He called Curtis. Curtis said yes the same day. For the past 14 months, Curtis had been conducting assessments on evenings and weekends, documenting every crack, every settlement pattern, every instance of spalling concrete and corroded rebar that told the story of structures failing from the inside. He used a camera the size of a pen. He filed reports through an encrypted portal Martin had set up on a secure server. He mapped structural deficiencies on a grid system the State Attorney General's office later described as the most precise field documentation they had ever received from a consulting engineer. He did this work in the same neighborhood where he lived, in the same buildings where his neighbors slept, at hours when most people assumed he was walking to the corner store or sitting in his car on his phone. He was never doing either of those things. He was looking at columns. He was measuring cracks. He was recording the slow, silent failure of structures that every family in those buildings believed were keeping them safe. He could not tell anyone, not his landlord, not the Ridgewood Neighborhood Council, not Vivian Desmond, who chaired that council, who lived in Ridgewood Commons herself on the 3rd floor, in Unit 312, directly above a column whose crack propagation rate kept Curtis up at night. He could not tell her because Leland Ross had connections inside the city permit office, and one leaked word about the investigation would give the developer time to file preemptive remediation claims that would delay forced inspections by 18 months. 18 months was time those buildings did not have, so he said nothing. He showed up at the block party. He nodded when Vivian passed. He waited. The waiting was the work. Vivian Desmond had chaired the Ridgewood Neighborhood Council for 9 years. She was 61. She had moved to Jacksonville from Valdosta, Georgia, in 1993, and she had spent the decades since building a life organized around the principle that nothing good comes to a place that does not defend itself. She had watched Ridgewood cycle through neglect and recovery and neglect again. She had attended city council meetings when no one else from the neighborhood bothered to show. She had organized the block party, the neighborhood watch, the community garden behind Building C, all on her own time, with her own money, and the specific exhausting energy of a woman who believes that if she lets go of the rope, the whole tent comes down. She was not a cruel person. She drove Mrs. Ayala to dialysis on Tuesdays. She kept peppermints in her purse for the children at the bus stop near her building. She called every new resident within the first week to welcome them and to explain, in a voice that was warm but left no room for ambiguity, how things worked in Ridgewood. She called Curtis 2 days after he moved in. He was polite. He thanked her. He did not attend the next council meeting, or the one after that. This was the seed. Vivian read his absence as indifference, and indifference to a woman who had spent 9 years holding a neighborhood upright through sheer will was not neutral. It was a statement. A man who showed up and parked his car and took up space and did not care enough to come to the meeting where the work got done. She noticed his hours. He left the apartment at odd times, 9 at night, 6 on a Saturday morning. He spent time in the parking lot with his phone and his voice low. She saw him once moving along the south wall of Building B with his phone held at his hip, and she did not know he was photographing a foundation crack, and she would not have believed it if someone had told her. She filed a noise complaint in March after Curtis and Martin Yu spent an evening in Curtis's kitchen reviewing core sample data with the window open, speaking in voices that carried further than they realized. The complaint was upheld. The property manager sent a letter. Curtis read it, filed it, and closed the window next time. In June, Vivian stepped in front of Curtis's car as he was backing out of the lot. She leaned to the driver's window and told him she had spoken to the property manager about unauthorized vehicles in the guest spaces and had specifically mentioned his unit number. The vehicle was Martin Yu's state-issued sedan, parked during a 4-hour document review. Curtis looked at her. He did not explain. He said he understood. He drove around her. In August, she called the school. She told the front office she was a concerned community member who had observed a father. She did not know his name, but he drove a beige Camry with a dent, picking up a student at irregular times, and she wanted to confirm that the child's enrollment and custody records were current. The school did not share any information. They noted the call. Curtis found out in October during a parent conference. The school secretary mentioned it in passing. He drove home. He packed B's lunch. He wound the watch. These were the things Vivian did with her certainty. Curtis could have ended all of it with 2 words: state investigation. He could have shown her the documentation portal and watched her sit down. He did not, because the 4 buildings were not yet secured. The warrants had not been signed, and the families in those buildings, including Vivian, had not yet been notified. The notification process had to follow a protocol that protected residents from retaliation and ensured relocation resources were in place before the structural orders were issued. Curtis did not control the timeline. He controlled only the quality of his work, and he intended for that work to be perfect, because 212 families were going to learn that their homes were not safe, and the least he could do was make sure the evidence was strong enough that someone would be held accountable. On the first Thursday of October, Martin Yu called Curtis at 7 in the morning. The warrants were signed. The structural orders for all 4 buildings were approved. Leland Ross Properties had been served notice. The state attorney general had scheduled a press conference for the following Monday. Martin told Curtis that his documentation had been formally cited in the filing and that the division director wanted to acknowledge his contribution at the press conference. Curtis said thank you. He said he would think about it. He poured Bee's cereal. He opened the window. He drove her to school and came back and stood in the kitchen for a moment before realizing he had forgotten to wind the watch that morning, which had not happened before. He went to the bathroom shelf. He picked it up. He counted the turns. The block party was 3 days later. They held it on the street between Building A and the community garden, with folding tables and a rented speaker playing music 2 decades old, and a lemonade stand run by a 12-year-old named Deshawn, who was charging $1.50 a cup and not making change for anyone. Bee had spent the previous hour at the library with Tess. Tess had offered to bring her to the block party because Curtis was on a call with Martin reviewing press conference logistics, and because Tess had offered, and because Curtis had said yes in a way that meant more than yes, and they both understood this without saying so. Tess was there when Curtis arrived. She was standing by the book exchange bin the library had set up, holding Bee's hand, Bee with a popsicle melting faster than she could eat it, Tess with a napkin already ready. The napkin told Curtis everything he needed to know about how long they had been together, and how naturally the rhythm had come to feel like something that had always been there. Vivian was at the entrance table. She had a clipboard. She had a list. She put her hand against Curtis's chest and pressed. Not a shove, a measured, deliberate press of an open palm, the way a person stops a door from opening further. Her rings caught the afternoon light. The family at the lemonade stand turned. The father at the cornhole boards looked over. She said the words about the assessment. She said them loudly. She meant them to carry. Curtis stood in the space she was trying to close and let the silence do what silence does when one person is loud and the other is not. Bee licked her popsicle. Tess tightened her hand around the smaller one inside it. Vivian looked at Tess. She wanted to know who this woman was and why she was standing beside this man as though she had every right to be there. Curtis looked at Tess. She was wearing a green sundress, and her braid was over her left shoulder, and her fingers were wrapped around Bee's, as though she had been doing it all her life. He looked back at Vivian. "She's my wife," he said. He said it the way you say something you have thought about more than you will admit, and less than you probably should. The words came out lightly, almost smiling. The way a person finally holds something up to the light that has been living too long in his pocket. Tess went very still. The color rose through her neck and into her face with the slow certainty of something that could not be undone. She looked at the ground. She bit the inside of her cheek, and then, barely above a breath, she said the same thing she had said once before, and would not say again for a long time. "I wish that were true." She did not look up. She kept her hand inside Bee's hand. The moment sat between all of them, still and weightless, the way a word sits after it has finally been said in the right place. Then the dark green sedan with State of Florida plates turned the corner and pulled to the curb, and Martin Yu stepped out in his charcoal blazer with his badge clipped to his pocket, and he walked up the sidewalk toward Curtis without looking at the block party or the lemonade stand or the woman whose hand was still raised in the air between them. He stopped in front of Curtis. His voice was the voice of a man who understood that the work was finished. "It's done, Doc," he said. "All 4 buildings. A G filed at noon. Leland Ross is shut down." He looked at B. He looked at the popsicle. "You could have told me you were at a party," he said. "I would have worn a better jacket." Curtis shook his hand. One shake, the kind that carries weight without performing it. Vivian Desmond was 4 feet away. She had heard the words. She had seen the badge. She had heard the name Leland Ross, the company that built her building. The building she had lived in for 6 years. The building whose stairwell cracks she had reported to the property manager twice and been told were cosmetic. She looked at Curtis. He looked at her. "B is in Mrs. Gutierrez's class," he said. "Room 108. The assessment was paid in August." He walked past the table. B handed her popsicle stick to Tess. who put it in her pocket without looking at it, the way a person does when a small action has become automatic. The three of them walked into the block party together. Vivian left before the party ended. She drove back to the lot and pulled into her numbered space, the one she had fought to get assigned when the lot was repainted 2 years ago. She turned off the engine. She sat there. She looked up at the building. 3rd floor, Unit 312. The cracks in the stairwell between the 2nd and 3rd floors. She had walked past them every day. She had thought they were cosmetic. She had been told they were cosmetic, and she had believed it because she needed to believe it, because this was her building and her neighborhood and the thing she had spent 9 years holding up. She sat in the car for a long time. She thought about the phone call to the school, the specific words she had used. Concerned community member. She had not given her name, but she had described the dent in his car, and she thought about how a school secretary might have relayed that to a man who was raising a daughter alone, a man conducting work that nobody knew about because nobody knowing was what made the work possible. She thought about her hand on his chest, the physical fact of it, her rings in the afternoon light, her palm against his jacket in front of his daughter, and in front of the woman whose fingers had been folded around the little girl's hand, the two of them standing there together while Vivian pushed at a man who had been trying to keep the whole neighborhood from collapsing. She went inside. She walked up the stairs slowly, her hand on the rail, and when she reached the second landing, she stopped and put her other hand flat against the stairwell wall, against the cracks she had reported and forgotten, and reported again. The plaster was cool. She had never thought about what was underneath it. She sat at her kitchen table. She watered the mint by the window. She poured too much. The water pooled in the saucer. She left it there. Curtis's Tuesday began the way every Tuesday began. 5:20. Watch wound. Window open. Pour over. Oat bread. No crusts. The sticky note drawing that morning was a whale wearing a party hat, which Curtis considered among his more ambitious compositions. Bea was in the back seat, tapping her lip. "Daddy," she said. "Yeah, Bea. Why did you tell that lady Miss Tess was your wife?" Curtis checked the mirror. He signaled onto Ridgewood Drive. The morning was overcast and the wipers were on the slow setting, the one that leaves just enough time between sweeps for the world to blur and then clear again. "I was being silly," he said. Bea considered this. She looked out the window at something only she could see. "Miss Tess got really red," she said. "She did," Curtis said. Bea tapped her lip 3 more times. "I think she wants to be your wife," Bea said. Curtis did not answer. He drove. The wipers swept. The road cleared and cleared again. He dropped Bea at the front entrance and watched her climb out with her backpack and her lunch bag and the mason jar of sticky notes she had brought for show and tell, which he had not known about until he saw it in her hands, which meant 31st graders were about to see his drawings of clouds in sneakers and frogs playing trumpets, and there was nothing to be done about it now. She waved. He waved. That afternoon, Martin called. The press conference had gone well. The Attorney General had named Project Cornerstone specifically. The structural reports had been entered into the public record. Martin said the division director had used the word meticulous 3 times when referring to Curtis's documentation. Also, Martin said, "You are going to get a letter from the AG's office, some kind of commendation." Curtis said he appreciated it. Martin paused. "You are going to put it in a folder, aren't you?" he said. "Probably," Curtis said. Martin laughed. "Put it in a nice folder," he said. The commendation arrived the following Thursday. Curtis opened it at the kitchen table, while Bea colored at the other end. He read it. He put it in the filing cabinet, in the same drawer where the manila folder labeled Lydia sat, between the lease and the insurance papers. He closed the drawer. He checked the basil Bea had planted in a school project, which was doing significantly better than any plant Curtis had ever been responsible for, and he thought this was probably as it should be. On Saturday, Curtis took Bea to the library. Tess was behind the children's desk. There was a stack of books with a pink sticky note on top that said BEA. Bea ran to the desk and collected her stack and disappeared into the beanbag chairs with the focus of someone who has important business to attend to. Curtis stood at the desk. Tess stamped a return. She did not look up. She was wearing a gray sweater. Her braid was over her right shoulder today, not the left. And Curtis noticed this because he noticed everything about which side her braid was on. He understood that this was the kind of noticing a person does when the word friend has stopped being adequate and the next word has not yet arrived. He picked up a book from the return cart. He turned it over. He put it back. Tess looked up. "You caused a problem," she said. He waited. She picked up another return and stamped it with more force than the stamp required. "The Hendersons from the block party," she said. "They came in yesterday. Mrs. Henderson asked me how long we had been married." Curtis put his hands in his pockets. "What did you tell her?" he said. Tess stamped another book. Her braid fell forward against her collar. When she spoke, her voice was the same voice from the block party, barely above a breath. the kind of volume a person uses when they are saying the thing they have already said once and mean twice. "I wish that were true," she said. She did not look up. She stamped the next book. Her hands were steady. The stamp hit the card with a clean, flat sound that echoed in the quiet of the children's section, where the beanbag chairs were, where Bea was reading, where every Saturday for 14 months 2 people had been building something without giving it a name. Curtis did not move. He stood at the desk and looked at the part in her hair and the braid over the wrong shoulder. He took his hands out of his pockets and placed them flat on the desk, close enough that his fingers almost touched hers. He left them there. 2 weeks later, on a Saturday evening, Vivian Desmond knocked on Curtis's door. She was holding a glass baking dish covered in foil. She held it the way a person holds something they are not sure will be accepted. "I made sweet potato pie," she said. "I made 2. And I cannot eat 2. This was not true. She had made 1. She made it that afternoon from a recipe she knew by memory, and she had put it in a glass dish that was not disposable, which meant he would have to return it, which meant she would have to come back. Curtis took the dish. He held it with both hands. "You did not have to do that," he said. He stood in the doorway. He did not invite her in. He did not close the door. He held the space between those 2 choices the way he held most things, with patience and without rush. "I should not have put my hand on you," Vivian said. She said it, looking at a point just below his chin, as though direct eye contact would cost more than she had available right now. Curtis nodded. The nod was small. It carried acknowledgement and nothing more. Not forgiveness and not understanding. Just the recognition that she had said a thing that needed saying and that he had heard it. Bea appeared behind his knee. She looked at Vivian. She looked at the dish. "Is that pie?" she said. "It is," Vivian said. Bea tapped her bottom lip. "My mama made sweet potato pie," she said. "Daddy says she put too much cinnamon in it, and that is what made it good." Vivian looked at the child. The child looked back at her with the honesty of a 6-year-old who does not yet understand that what she has just said has landed in the older woman's chest like a stone dropped into still water. Vivian nodded once. She turned and walked down the hallway. She did not look back. Curtis closed the door. He set the pie on the counter. He did not cut it yet. That night, after Bea was asleep, Curtis stood in the kitchen. He opened the filing cabinet and took out the commendation letter and read it one more time. He put it back. He took out the folder labeled Lydia. He held it without opening it. He placed it back in the drawer and closed it carefully, the way a person closes something they are not finished with, but that does not need to be opened tonight. He went to the bathroom shelf. He picked up the Timex and held it for a moment, the scratched face cool against his palm, the second hand making its patient way around the dial, 4 minutes behind the rest of the world. He set it back beside the reading glasses. He turned off the bathroom light. He walked to Bea's room. She was asleep on her stomach, one arm off the bed, her drawings from the week spread across the nightstand like evidence of a life being vigorously lived. The top drawing was a whale wearing a party hat, copied from his sticky note, but better, significantly better. She had added a birthday cake and a second whale, and a son wearing sunglasses, and she had signed it in the bottom right corner with a small star, a habit she had started 3 weeks ago for no reason she could explain, a habit that had not come from Curtis. He did not know where it came from. He was not sure he needed to. He pulled the door to 3 inches open, enough for the hallway light to cross the carpet. He went back to the kitchen. He filled the kettle for morning. He set out the pour-over and the mug and the oat bread. He opened the window 3 inches because the house needed to breathe. He stood there for a moment with his hands on the counter, looking at the dark glass and the kitchen reflected in it, the right number of lights still on. He turned the last one off.